Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Fortum. I'm the host of this podcast, Doers Within Emerging Markets. And I just want to share my experience with using Anchor so far. So when the pandemic started, I thought about starting a podcast, and the whole idea was to bring in some really amazing folks that are doing some great work in their respective industries within the emerging markets. And the Anchor platform really helped me get the word out there and also just make it a lot easier for me to invite the guest and just share the amazing experiences they've had and the amazing work they're doing in their respective industries within the emerging markets. So it's pretty fun. You don't even worry about the technical part of making a podcast. You actually just focus more on the content. And Anchor has done it really well for me. So I will highly encourage anybody who is trying to start a podcast to try to use. Just check out Anchor, and I think you won't regret it. I'm not a technical person, but if you listen to these episodes that I've been publishing so far, it seems like I know what the technical part of it, but Anchor helps you take care of the technical part, and you just focus on the content. So feel free to check it out. I highly encourage. You won't regret it, and it's right there. You don't pay anything. So in times like this, I think starting a podcast and getting the word out there, irrespective of what you're doing, will be a really great experience. So thank you guys for listening to my episodes. Please check out Anchor, and you will have a great time. So cheers, guys, and see you guys next episode. Thanks.
Sorry if I'm not making eye contact. I'm using my iPad, so the camera is way on that side. And then the experiences I will touch on are mine. They're not necessarily fully representative of the entire Ghanaian market, the entire West African market. But these are some of the observations that I have made, recognizing that I haven't run my own business in Ghana. So a lot of this would be third-party opinion. I think that to begin, just the idea of entrepreneurship has been pretty prevalent in the Ghanaian setting for as long as I can remember, and long before me. Except that I think that a lot of folks who run their own businesses didn't necessarily identify as entrepreneurs, and so a lot of sole proprietors, self-owned businesses, small shops here and there, doing all kinds of ventures, selling paints, groceries, whatever it is. But they haven't necessarily identified as, okay, this is not just me selling and buying or whatever, trading. This is a business idea that can evolve, right? So I'd start with that. But just generally, if you walk in the streets of Accra, capital, or in any city in Ghana, there are all kinds of small businesses of different sizes, small, large, medium. And I think that statistically, the vast majority of entrepreneurs in Ghana are women. I think I looked at the stats about a month or so ago. I saw a report that said Ghana was leading the world in terms of women entrepreneurs per capita. I think it was about 61% of all entrepreneurs in the country were women, which I thought was pretty cool. On the ground, I'd say that one of the challenges is, or critiques for businesses, small businesses in Ghana, is that a lot of times if a model, process, product, whatever it is proven to have some kind of success, it's very quickly replicated. And so, can you provide the link? Yes, I will. And so, once some business venture is thriving for whoever started it, it's very easy to see other people jump in it without because it's worked for someone, without necessarily doing their own groundwork to test the viability, or maybe even brainstorming other ideas that could also be viable. I'm trying to think of examples. growing when I was much younger, there was a thing about most people didn't have cell phones, and so there was there were these comm centers. We call them communication centers, comm centers, and it was basically someone with a phone, and you paid some money, you got a certain number of minutes, and then you can make a call. And once that proved to be a viable product, there was just a proliferation. Everybody started to do that, I think that that's good on one hand because you can capitalize on a working opportunity, but on the other hand, it takes away from the profitability of whoever started it. Also because the product just becomes so concentrated on the same street. There are like 20 of those, everyone's fighting for the same number of customers. And then the other downside to that is, people are not, entrepreneurs are not brainstorming other solutions to other existing problems because everyone's going headfirst into the same idea. And I've seen that with many different products that have burst on the Ghanaian scene. I think it's pretty similar in nearby West African markets as well. I give another example. So they've kind of transitioned from the comm centers now because most people have, the average person has a cell phone in Ghana now, but they've gone to mobile money, and mobile money is like a whole new economy in African countries. It's very big in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and pretty much is spreading very fast across the continent. And it simply is taking over regular currency. So funds can be transferred just by your mobile phone or by your cell phone. Rather than if you wanted to send money to someone in a different city, or even in the same city, instead of sending it through the bank, wiring it and getting charged fees, you can just send it via text through an operator to the other person, and they receive the funds. They can not only decide to cash those funds, they can also use the funds on their phones to make purchases, and it's proven more convenient, faster for the average person than going through the bank. You also don't necessarily have to have a bank account, which is huge for petty traders because they don't necessarily have all. They're not able to meet all the requirements of the banks, but this is a little more loose for them, and so it's really convenient. But see, the moment that burst onto the scene and it opened that semi-industry, everybody jumped into it because it's easy to replicate. All you need is a phone and maybe, I don't even think it's a big licensing process. A phone, a spot, a shed, whatever it is, and you can start the business. So there's not a huge barrier to entry, and everybody's jumped into that. So I just say that to underscore the point that when you start a business, if it's easily replicable, a lot of people are going to jump into it because everyone's looking for the fastest way to make the quickest buck. So that's I'd say one stereotype. It's not even a stereotype. It's actually pretty evident. It's real. It happens. Another thing that I thought about when Jacob asked the question is the sense of orderliness, if I could put it that way. When you're working with the average Ghanaian, you have to make, especially coming from this kind of context, a Western upbringing, Western work culture, you have to make the accommodation for just cultural adjustments. Their understanding of sense of priority, time, and the sense of responsibility is a little different. You set a deadline for a project. You kind of have to be open to the possibility that that deadline would not be met with the same urgency as you would expect. So that's another stereotype. I think we've talked about some of those on Jamani a few times. But it is true, and it takes, I think that there's some responsibility on the part of the entrepreneurs on the ground over there to understand that they need to reorient themselves to meet say, investor expectations, but also that there's a responsibility on the part of external investors going in, that the expectations that they have coming from here will have to be adjusted so that they're to be more realistic with what's on the ground. So you're not disappointed, you don't burn out going out there, because it is real. You say you need this done by X day, it probably wouldn't necessarily be done. That said, there are pretty responsible people out there, but they're few and far between, and you can scout for good talent, good partners to work with on the ground. But for the average entrepreneur that you'd be working with, I think there's a reasonable expectation that they won't necessarily have the same work ethic. Not that they're lazy, it's just not in their work culture to uphold deadlines, time, expectations the same way as we do here. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to add to those. I think those are the first two that came to mind.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I know it sounded like a Kevin's lecture, but I think I just wanted him to kind of give a full breadth of where he's coming from, and I think having the opportunity to just express, from the tech side, but also kind of the on the ground experience, which is, I think, the last point he mentioned about just poor follow-up process. And it's just like by nature, it's like the standard of how the standard has been set such that it's like two different standards, like this African standard and this is the global standards. And just being aware of some of these this idiosyncratic I won't say limitations that sometimes are specific to countries might be important for us as a group, but also how we talk about the issues that we face. And hopefully I want to make this interactive. So if anybody has any feedback to what Kevin said, please, you can chime in now. Or if there's anything that struck your mind, or there's something that is very personal to you, please just chime in.
A couple of questions came up for me while you were talking, Kevin. I feel like something that's a common theme in what we talk about here is the challenges that the involvement of government in business poses to entrepreneurs. But I wonder what types of mechanisms there are for protecting patents, trademarks, and intellectual property, and how they're used in the context where you're saying people's ideas are regularly being directly replicated. I don't know. It just made me think about that because government has such a heavy hand in the ways that businesses run. And I don't know if that's true specifically in Ghana, but it is a theme that we have discussed across the continent. Are there regulations around that? Are they enforced, or is it just something that is just sort of, it is what it is? And the second thing that I wrote down was just, is challenges in access to financial services in the traditional sense of prohibitor to scaling, and is that something that when we do talk about what solutions and how we can work together and think about ways in which these challenges can be solved, is that one of the bigger challenges for scaling businesses? So.
I'd respond to the first question first, and anyone should, I encourage everyone else to chime in if they can. I might need a recap on the second question. So I haven't done any proper research on patent protection, intellectual property protection in Ghana, but I know there are. I can't give details on that, but I know there are. But I'm glad you asked the question you did, and the way you did. The enforcement is the really, really key part. And just as a general theme in Ghana, there are a lot of regulations and that are pretty synonymous to what you'd find here or in any very advanced country. The challenge is they have a hard time enforcing a lot of those regulations. There's just not enough enforcement and oversight in my experience. And so I could spend some time looking maybe this weekend, and I'm more than confident that I will find regulatory protections for intellectual property, for patents, for businesses. But I can't think of an agency that's actually enforcing that, that's going after and saying, hey, if your idea is poached, these are the remedies for you. I just cannot. And if there is an agency like that, I don't think they're doing that kind of work to the fullest capacity, because I only gave 2 examples of businesses that have been replicated so quickly and so easily. There's countless more, just countless. Any business that doesn't have a very high barrier to entry in Ghana that I can think of, has been replicated somehow without real repercussion. So I just don't think that there's much enforcement there. What I will say though is that they're getting better at it. But see, a lot of this is also politically influenced, which is a challenge. You have one government that is very, very up to the task and progressive in that sense. And then once there's a change in regime, there's some retrogression. Yeah, and that's very real. And so I'll give another example, and I'll just open the floor. I'll take your second question again. For a long time, the main port in Accra was plagued with just corruption. It was a very bureaucratic process to clear goods from the ports. If you were in commerce and you were clearing, say, cars, importing cars that you were going to sell, it was so bureaucratic. You could have cars sit at the port for 2 years because of paperwork. And basically, it was paperwork that didn't make sense, just from my own family experience. And it dragged because people in charge just wanted to be paid directly into their pockets. And so there was just a lack of transparency. And it was costing not only business owners, it was costing the government as well, because that impacts GDP and also the funds that should be going by way of tariffs, excise taxes, and all of that to the government were not going, because these imports were not being recorded because there were corrupt officials. Until just about recently, about 2018, a consulting firm called West Blue. I only know this because I had a call with them on Monday. They came in, they're an IT consulting firm, and they just introduced a product to make the entire process paperless. And that just got rid of all the channels, because now it just got rid of all the human intermediaries. You just fill the form, you pay everything online, it just goes straight to where it should go. You don't have to talk to anybody. And since its implementation in 2018, the government has saved $500 million from what they would have lost. Yeah, $500 million from what they would have lost in the years prior to the implementation of that app. It's a simple app. So they're getting better. But like I said, it's also very politically driven. Once the regime changes and it's not a very accountable government, things can turn around again, unfortunately. But yeah, so what was your second question, Yuz?
If anyone else wants to ask a question too, that's okay.
Yeah,
I want to make a point to that patent issue.
Norman, please, can you introduce yourself? There's a new member here, and I think Mike hasn't met you yet, and Kevin. I think Kevin has met you, but just introduce yourself again. And I like your outside.
Mike, I met you. I think he was in the first call 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name's Norman Musengimana, and born in Rwanda. Right now I'm living in Canada, 3 years now. And I'm working on a company called BizSkills Academy. And what you're trying to do basically is you're trying to build a virtual incubation program that can be scaled to remote communities in developing countries, and we help people have ideas from those communities to be able to make them probably potentially viable businesses. And we focus on the youth and the women. But if a man has money, we don't reject them. So basically, when it comes to patents, from a startup perspective, and myself having gone through maybe probably a couple of startups now, the number one challenge is not actually having a legal framework. The number one challenge is having the financial capabilities to even file them. Because as a startup, you are thinking, should I go the patent route, which might take even 1 year, or should I just get down and start implementing my idea? So if it's a brilliant idea that has been probably developed through an academic institution, because commercializing a patent takes long, and probably because of the process that is involved into developing the innovation, then in that sense, patenting or IP makes sense. If you're talking about IP from a perspective of trademark, that one is easy, and I think that one is doable in many countries, and it's not as expensive. But if you're talking about a patent, I think it's a different kind of story. Now, that's when you're starting as a company and you have this idea that you would want to protect. Even myself, this skill is not protected because in Canada, you're supposed to have between $5,000 to $20,000. So I was like, all the noble ideas that we have, should we spend that 20K in patenting the ideas or the IPs that we have? Or should we actually build something and validate it, and probably later on when you have the money, then you can work backwards. So that challenge, whether you're talking about Africa or the West, it's always there. But academic patenting, very easy. Then when it comes to, let's say now you have been lucky and you're patented your IP, you're protected, but then there is an infringement on your IP. That's another very, very big challenge that startups have, because now there is all the legal proceedings, there is the lawyers, or the time you waste following up. And it is really a big challenge for many startups, I know, even here in Canada. And people will not want to waste their time there. They will probably look for a way to pivot or look for a way to innovate again and continue along the same line. And if the person or the entity that is involved into infringing your patent is a huge entity or probably a rich entity with huge financial resources, then you don't even want to go there because you can never win. You're not going to have as good lawyers as they do. So that's from a Western perspective and an African perspective. Now you talk about the Chinese perspective. In China, if I take your patent that is filed in the US or in Canada or in the West, anywhere in the world other than China, and I am the number one person to patent it in China, I own that patent. If you're going to launch at any time in the future in China, you have to buy my patent. And that's a very big challenge to probably to innovators in the West, because what you do as someone who's interested in IP or patenting who has that financial capabilities in China is you just look at YPO or one international patenting office or different patenting offices around the world, and you see whatever, whenever you patent your idea, it means it becomes public. So your provisional patent will be public, and then they will take it and they will start converting it into Mandarin. If you have a final one, they have access to it, they will just convert the language. So I think the government in China doesn't check if that patent exists elsewhere. But what I know is the law says whoever patents first in their market is the one who owns the patent. So that's a very big challenge that people have to really kind of look forward to or think about and see how. I think from the Western perspective, there's nothing you can do to it. So as a startup entrepreneur, really, for me, what I always say is, whether you are protected or not, some ideas are worth protecting, but some ideas probably are not even worth protecting, because if it's a low entry kind of business, overnight, tomorrow morning you find someone who's doing it much better than you are thinking of doing it, because they have seen the struggles you've gone through. And now, if they have the financial capabilities, they can do it much better than you do. Unfortunately, that's the reality. And we have to learn how to live with it. Or if you are the first into the market, you always try to be ahead of the game.
And thanks so much, Norman. I think you have a very in-depth and actually on-the-ground experience doing business in Africa. I mean, you have this, just getting to know you, I've realized that there's some depth. It's not just a macro level, but a very micro level. If you can just go a little bit into the differences between doing business in Rwanda versus, Uganda and all the other African countries that you have been, able to carry out any form of legal business. Can you just give I know because we always look at Rwanda as the Singapore of Africa, right? Not to shade Ghana. Ghana is doing pretty well, but can you just give us what has been your experience so far? Registering a company, perception with the Chinese in Rwanda, for example, how they do investment in there. So can you just please share that with us? And I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm thinking maybe you can address it from different perspectives. From a political perspective, for example, any country that has an Exim bank, an export-import bank, China, Turkey, which other one? And they are pushing their small businesses to kind of venture in Africa. Those countries are doing pretty well in very, very many African countries because their people come with money and they just come and buy an existing business. They just do some small touches here and there. And for example, I'll give you an example. In Rwanda, there is one hotel that I helped develop the business plan and fundraise for from a local bank. And when Turkish Airlines was about to open in Rwanda, one Turkish young guy wanted, I think he knew, maybe he's politically connected to the government in Turkey. He knew about the whole thing that was going on, and he kind of came like 6 months before in Rwanda and bought that hotel about $1 million. We had the money we had raised to build the hotel was about $300,000. And 6 months after he paid $1 million, the Turkish government came in with Turkish Airlines, and they gave him a contract for 5 years worth $2 million. So they it's simple games like those ones. So from a political kind of perspective, countries that are not really enforcing human rights, rule of law, freedom of speech, those kind of stuff, find Africa very conducive because our politicians don't want people who come with with conditions. So in that sense, China does very well, Turkey does very well. Which other country? I think those are the ones that are really killing it in Africa. Then from more like, what do you say? From a business perspective, when it comes to kind of registering a company, for example, the case of Rwanda today, even where you are right now, you can register a company right now, tomorrow morning, less than 24 hours, your incorporation certificate will be in your inbox. If your name has been confirmed that it's not taken in Rwanda, less than 24 hours, if you want to test, you can test it. It's not very expensive. You will have it. And that came as a result of the World Doing Business report done by the World Bank, because they have specific policy areas that they push for. And they have these, how do you call them? Like requirements or prerequisites that you're like ticking the box. Is this happening? Yes. How long does it take to register land? Maybe less than 2 months. Then you tick, and then they rank countries. So Rwanda is always among, for the past probably 7 years or 10 years, Rwanda has been among probably the top 10, top 20 reformists. There are other countries that are doing it. And no, one more thing to talk about Rwanda is if you are in Rwanda, incorporating a business is a one-stop service center. You don't go from one area to another. You go to one office, you get your tax identification number in like 1 hour, everything is completed from one one office. No, you don't move about. So there are many countries that are following the same model. I know South Africa, I think some states or some states or provinces in South Africa or some region, they have like one-stop centers. I know Kenya is working on that. I know Ghana is also doing well. I know Ethiopia is doing something about that. But when it comes to, so there are also two ways you can look at starting a business in Africa. And for me, I'm not very sure about this. Many people don't talk about it. But let's say you are black and another person is white, or not even white, non-African, and you want to incorporate a business and you have money, with all those bureaucracies that you're always told about, you can incorporate your business if you have a good lawyer pretty fast using money. And that's when I say when you have money, sometimes corruption can work in your favor or on your side, can be on your side in countries that are corrupt and you're willing to do it. Some people have money, but they're not willing to corrupt anyone. But if you have a very good lawyer, we have some very smart lawyers who will assess you. I can ask you, probably they ask you like 10 questions, and then they know how to the values, your values as an investor, and maybe they know if they can bundle maybe that fee, what I can call a corruption kind of amount of money into the legal fees, so that you as an entity or as an investor, if there is something that goes wrong afterwards, probably they are not going to come after you. So in that case, they will charge you a lot of money and make sure that they expedite your process, and it can be pretty fast, irrespective of the corruption or the bureaucracy in a country, if you can buy your way around it. So far I've worked probably in 5 countries, and the worst country that I've worked in, I always talk about it, is South Sudan. Because in South Sudan, there is a law that if you don't have the citizenship if you're not a citizen of South Sudan, you must incorporate with a local person. And these local people are not necessarily business savvy, and they don't actually care about the business. They may not even know the vision of the business. All they know is they have some 25% shares in a business that sells ABCD, and they'll be waiting at the end of the month to come and collect their money. So that's one of the worst countries that I've seen, but it doesn't mean that doing business there is bad. Doing business in South Sudan, if you can afford it and if you can withstand insecurity, because the country is a bit insecure, you can make pretty good money, and sometimes you can buy your way into some of these bureaucracies.
Thanks, Norman. I think just to recap, so I think Kevin was talking about just from a Ghana's perspective, but he iterated some stereotypes, point of entry barriers, how tech has changed the sphere. He talked about female entrepreneurship being one of the Ghana being one of the countries with the higher female, with more female entrepreneurs than men. Going to Norman, it was all about how China and some foreign countries prefer to work with African countries because they don't respect certain things like human rights, or they can just work with one person that has control for the whole country, such that they can implement their policies or their business ideologies quicker. I think that kind of the main aspect of what I think Norman is trying to send across is that some countries like Rwanda have this reformed system where it's really easy to just start something, and and they have some transparency that comes with it. And you have countries like South Sudan where you need to be you have to be a citizen there, and there's just so much bureaucracy and red taping that might actually limit your progress as an entrepreneur. But we always have this idea of Pan-Africanism, that we have to open borders and there has to be intertrade within countries, such that we can be able to enrich local entrepreneurs who are trying to build things that might have a very stiff competition from international companies, right? So I just think, and this is leading to somewhere, I guess, and which is something that I will kind of iterate at the end of the session. But do you guys have any comments? I know Norman and Kevin probably have that in-depth experience, and they've been reading a lot about that. But I would love to open it to others. And if Emily want to say something, Mike.
Yeah.
On the show.
So one of the things that I know was a big problem in China, I mean, like, of course, intellectual property and China, you know, violating that is a problem for sort of global markets. That's very well known. But I think it's been very interesting in the past, at least 5 years that I've been paying attention, is that there has been a substantial shift in the way that China is trying to position itself. It's no longer trying to race to the bottom and be the world's factory, right? They've really shifted away from a PR campaign of saying we can make it more, faster, cheaper. Quality will suffer, but we can make it much, much cheaper. To, I think Huawei is an excellent example of like, those cameras on those phones are amazing. They're amazing to the point that people are like, oh yeah, I'm definitely getting the Chinese spy phone. They acknowledge that like, this is almost definitely stealing all of their data. And they're like, I'm going to get it until I can't physically bring it into the US. And I'm just like, wow, that is surprising brand loyalty. Like, you're willing to overcome some notable possible limitations to be like, yeah, that phone camera is really sweet. And I think that's a very, very interesting shift in the way they're doing things, because on one hand, one of the things that I've learned is that there isn't as much of a practice of sort of like value added differentiation in a lot of developing nations. And I remember seeing the exact same thing happening in Haiti, except it was with, I guess in Kenya you call it a boda boda, but basically motorcycle taxis. Everybody bought a motorcycle, no one could make any money. And there didn't seem to be as commonplace of a habit of being like, and you get this perk or that perk, or I'm slightly faster or I'm safer. There didn't seem to be this differentiation. And one of the things that I'm personally interested in, and whether or not you have any answers or even thoughts about it, is I'm less interested in wealth creation and like overall GDP, and I'm actually more interested in understanding wealth creation in the context of regional resiliency, because I think it is clearly evident to anyone who has turned on the television at any time in the past year, the US is phenomenal at wealth generation, but we're not necessarily particularly good at regional resiliency. So while certain areas like one of my friends, she, like everybody she knows is basically from Berkeley, and they have basically been untouched. You know, everybody she knows has had a job through the whole crisis. They were all able to go remote. None of their kids lack for a computer. You know, they're in sort of this oasis setting because there's this massive concentration of wealth, power, influence, and resources just floating about in California. And so while it might be, you know, it might be difficult from one perspective to see this proliferation of sort of like low quality replication as a strategy of business, it does allow for many people to have access to a piece of the pie, in which trying to compete in agriculture in the US as like a newcomer, you're battling down ADM and Monsanto, which is they're terrifying behemoths. And so I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts about like, how can you have enough, and obviously we're not going to answer this question, but like, how can you sort of have enough regulation that you have some protection of IP, that you incentivize diversification in a market, but how do you prevent those same forces from centralizing all of the wealth and then removing it from the local community?
That's a really good question. I need to think about that for a couple of weeks. But
yeah, if you could answer that, you would solve lots of global problems.
Exactly. I mean, there's this guy from Ghana, and I know Kevin knows him. I love this guy. His name is Sango Deli, and he's he's an investor, and he pretty much talked about. So I mean, going through the premise of unicorn companies as the hallmark to develop Africa poses this challenge of wealth inequality. Right, the idea that we should just do the same thing of, you know, having the Rockefellers and, you know, I mean the modern day Gates and the Amazon guy who I think I talked to Kevin earlier this morning. I think he made like $13 billion this past week or something like that. It's just like massive world, but it's not equally distributed. And there's a danger for that in Africa, because when you look at the Floto wave and the Andela and stuff like that, and the world is concentrated within a few young entrepreneurs, we don't get to see local participation of that world creation. And I think it poses a really great challenge of how do we democratize innovation that comes through technology, right? Because technology actually creates that inflection. And I mean, it can create exponential wealth creation so quickly that a few might take advantage and just keep that to themselves, right? But I think there are three layers to this, and I might be wrong, but I think one of the things that we should seriously consider is how can there be some really good partnerships or collaborations that come into play where local small businesses have some like a plug-in into large businesses. And I think one model I'm thinking of is how Alibaba supports small businesses, right? I think there's this synergy that comes with ensuring that they collaborate with large corporations once they use the platform of Alibaba. So there has to be some platforms that actually either bring small businesses together to become a monopoly in some sense, in quotations, but it has to be very intentional from policy as well as local participation in terms of, like, people that have influence in the local sector should have conversations with high-rank country representatives in a way that if the Chinese are coming in, they're on the table, or any other foreign countries coming in, they're on the table. But I think there has to be some systemic reformations and early analysis of how these high-tech companies that I'm interested to invest in, through Germany Ventures, has to be very inclusive on how they license their deals and how they, kind of build a small hubs across the country, which something like Andela has been doing. But I've not talked about the two other layers, but I think it's a conversation that we have to really talk about. And I like the fact that you bring up China as a point of reference, but it's very interesting. So I'm curious to hear about any other person's thought on that and on their take on that.
Maybe what I can say is that has a lot of things to do with what Kevin said before. So a lot of maybe Nigeria economy might be different than South Africa and probably Kenya, but many of the African economies depend on who do you know and the political system in place. So one government can have a really great initiative, but the moment that government goes out, they go out with their own stuff, and the new one wants to erase whatever the other government did. So from that perspective, we have kind of a policy like our policies and our institutions are not sustainable. They do things depending on where the wind is blowing from. If it's blowing from this side, that side is going to be. If it comes from that side, everything goes out of is kind of put into a mess. So from that perspective, you have a challenge. Plus the fact that once you become a bit, once you make some really good money in Africa, you automatically kind of become a politician somewhat. Someone called Dangote has managed to stay out of politics. I don't know how he does it, but usually there is a certain level of business you hit and you kind of become a politician, which means that when that government goes, you're also supposed to go. So that one is a complicated one.
Norman, can you just give us who Aliko Dangote is? I think some people don't know.
Oh, Dangote, I think right now is the richest African man, not self-made. I think was given like $200,000 by his grandfather or his father, something of that sort.
Yeah.
But right now he's worth between 10 billion to 17 billion, and he made all his money through trading in commodities, most of the money initially. But right now he's also in cement in many countries, not even one, maybe like 3-4 countries. And he's just at the verge. He has had one startup which failed, irrespective of the money he put in, the tomato processing plant, tomato paste. But I hear it's still working, but at a very probably 30% capacity. But right now he's building the world's largest fuel processing plant in Nigeria. And I think that guy is for many years to come, is going to be the most successful African entrepreneur anywhere in the world. If we remove Elon Musk, you say he's not South African.
I just have one thing to add to that. Aliko is not just the richest man in Africa, he's actually the richest black man in the world. He's at $7.6 billion today. So
yeah, that is true. That is true. Does anybody I want to make sure we are right on time, and I also want to hear other people's voices. At least Mike should say just hello or something. And Michelle too. If you guys have any questions or from what Norman shared or what Kevin shared, I know this is a little bit unfair because some people, just by nature of what they've been doing for the past few years, they have. And River too. River, if you have anything to share, please. Sorry, I forgot you. I didn't see. But if you have any questions, because feel free to just say something, and in relation to what anybody has said or what you're thinking about in this conversation we're having. And don't feel pressure to.
No, so like when Kevin was talking about the economy and like how things work in Ghana, it reminded me a lot of how things were in India. That's kind of relating to that, like emerging markets. And I was just fascinated by the entire this thing. I'm sorry, I'm a little shy to talk right now, but it was a very like interesting conversation. Thank you so much, guys.
Okay, well, don't make Riva shy, please.
no, Riva's not shy.
Mike, do you have anything? Michelle, any thoughts?
I'm just like, my brain was already fried coming into this, so it's just been a lot of intaking it all as usual usually, but I love everyone's insight, but nothing extra. I have a lot of research to do.
Yeah. It's all good. Thanks so much, man, for just being here. Appreciate you.
Of course.
Michelle?
I can, like, where my parents come from, Dominican Republic, it's the same thing. Recently, they just voted in a new president. So a lot of people are just they were showing recordings of people just leaving the offices who are no longer part of this, that are part of the previous administration, and now the new one's coming in. So it's kind of the same thing, unfortunately. But yeah, just learning a lot. There's like a lot of statistics I have to look at, like similar to what Mike said. And, I'm just open to continuing to learn more and more and more. And one thing I thought about was more partnerships incentivized in, different, and I think this might be for Norman or whoever has done a lot of startups, but how are partnerships incentivized in like the different settings that you've started up businesses? Because I know corruption is a big thing that, and naturally even here I've heard cases that if it's not always what you know, it's who you know. So if you know someone who works in X office, you can get something expedited. That happens even here in the States, but we hear a lot more prevalent, in the news, I guess, in other places. So just wanted to hear more about that from either from a governmental perspective or maybe like a regional perspective by, each city in the country.
I think, yeah, Norman, I think that's for you. And just a brief note. So feel free to step on now. I think after this question, we'll just do a recap. But Lisa's been kind enough to put in some of our recap notes, basically about the BOB consulting project. Feel free to email me. We'll have a separate session on that. And we are planning on doing that beginning next week. But by the way, it's in the group chat, and we'll reiterate that once we really rounding up. But Norman, if you can take that question, really appreciate it.
I think she is point on. I think it doesn't really depend on cities or countries. I think there is one of the meetings we did and we talked about lobbying in the US and how they are professional people who lobby and their job is to lobby or their profession. I think lobbying to the African context, for me, I think it's corruption or nepotism or something of that. That there is a direct relationship to either nepotism or corruption or having money and buying the system of buying a process. I think anywhere in the world, if you know people, you're going to get things done. If you can pick up a call and call the director of a department in a ministry, any country, I think, even in this country, in Canada, I think you're going to get things done. And I think that's why networking has been a very powerful tool in business, because if you can, the more people you know, the more confidence, no, not confidence, the more relationship you build, as long as they're reliable and people can really count on your trust, whatever you come up with, whatever initiatives you come up with. It's very easy to do business through networking, the people you know, and kind of get a leverage over everybody else who's trying to get the same thing but doesn't have the networks that you have. So it's true in Africa, it's true, I think, everywhere I've gone.
Thanks, Norman. I think, yeah, relationships are key, and that is what we at JamanInclusive are trying to do. That's a shameless plug there. So I think this conversation has not ended. It is just a start. This session was to introduce the next few series, which we will go deep into African investment entrepreneurship per region in the following 5 weeks, and we will also send out resources ahead of time for you guys to review, so that Professor Norman sitting at the table, he's like a professor. He's like a professor. You guys will feel more engaged in it. And so I apologize. I will send this Tuesdays or Wednesdays, but I'll try my best to send this during the weekends, so that at least you just get acquainted with some of the conversations early on. And just to talk again about the Black-owned business consulting. So we're going to schedule a time out of this regular time, and we already have people that we know more than willing to participate. But please, if you still have that nagging interest, please email me or Liz, and we'll add you to that call. 2 more things, and I think it's an interesting thing. I said earlier in the session that there's something exciting I wanted to share with you guys, and I've talked to Liz about this on the very surface, and it has not been it has not been well polished yet. But one thing that I really love to just tell you guys ahead of time is, in summer of 2021, I'm actually thinking that we can do a collective trip to Africa. We do 5 countries or 6, depending on people's availability and people's interest, on just doing like a group travel, right? And I think this is really exciting, and this actually bring what we are talking about on these platforms this end of this year and on the spring of next year into actual fruition, right? And we this is something I've been thinking about for a really long time, but I think that will actually be a very good way for us to meet entrepreneurs. We can do like a small microfinancing together, chip in, do like a syndicate, angel investing syndicate, and find really interesting tech companies or agricultural related companies to invest in, but also hopefully visit B-Skills Academy's office in Africa and meet other partners and collaborators that are part of JamanInclusive. So this is summer of 2020, but we can have a year to think about it, figure out visa issues and all that stuff. And I think it'll be very exciting, and I think it'll be very life-changing, right? So just to put that in the back of your minds, one of the things that we might be thinking about is how to curate it, right? If people can do a month commitment, they can just we can create it in such a way that if you just want to join us for like the Kenyan trip, for the 1 week trip, you can just join us for the Kenyan trip, so that you don't have to take a month off, right? And so that was Lisa's idea, and I think that's brilliant because we don't expect you to just take 4 weeks off, which is really hard in the United States, so or in some other countries. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, because I think you will need a year to plan this. So just put it out there, and that helps a lot in the next series of conversation we're having, right? We'll talk about investment and entrepreneurship specific to each region, and that will help us pick the countries that we decide to go. But I know Rwanda is on the list. Cameroon has to be on the list, but we have a civil war going on right now. So if there'll be no bias, we're gonna pick based on just opportunity, good learning curve, safe, most importantly, and hopefully COVID is over by then. So let's bring it on there. So, and the last announcement, which I'll try to bring. So I talked to Michelle separately. Was it last week or this week? This week. And we talked about just real estate investment and how to create our own personal wealth. So I reached out to a very good friend who actually has a $1 million real estate investment in Boston, and she is willing to do a Zoom session to talk about her experience and how she built her portfolio to $1 million real estate investment. And I reached out to her today, and she said, yeah, sure, she's willing to do that. I can send you guys once she decided. She said either next week or the week after, but once she's picked a specific date, I'm gonna send that to the JamanInclusive group. And if you guys have the time, I think it will be a very transformative experience. I'll share her link on the chat right now. You can go to our web page, and I've talked to her on several occasions, and she's very smart. She knows when to do. When to invest, what areas to look for in the United States, and she knows like how to create personal wealth. So I think it'll be very, very helpful. I know this is not JamanInclusive, but I think as a group, I think it'll be really exciting for us to learn together. As we think about Africa, we should think about how we create our own personal wealth too. But she's a United States specific. I know that for sure. So it's not Africa specific, but I mean, who knows? We can do investments here on a personal level. So that was the other one I was really excited about. And I'll send you guys a specific date as well. It's probably going to be next week or the week after. Okay, the very, very last thing, we have a Slack channel. And please, I know some people don't participate in the Slack channel, but please make an effort. We actually have one member. I mean, Emily does a really good job to kind of get the Slack channel going, but please, I think there's a lot that we can do, especially for those who can attend these online conversations. Just going to Slack and just, I mean, you don't have to, if you don't have the time, it's okay, but just go in. There's so many interesting links, articles, and you can get this conversation going, right? So please just check it out. Let us know if it's too cumbersome. I mean, it's a learning curve for every one of us. So just check it out. If you're not invited yet, please let me know. I think Michelle, you're not in it yet, but I'm gonna send you an invitation right after this. So yeah, so that's it. If you guys have any last questions or anything about what I said.
Yeah, one thing for me, Jacob. Yeah. I don't know if I'm in the email distribution.
Oh, really?
Check, and then yeah.
Are you sure?
Maybe.
I'm sorry, man.
No, you're good. If you could include the Slack too. I don't know if you said you're gonna do that, but
okay. I'm definitely gonna check that out for sure. Thank you so much, man. Sorry about that. I thought you included that. Any questions about anything? And Liz, oh sorry, Liz still there?
I'm here.
Do you can you anything? I forgot.
No, I think you covered it all. Yeah, just really excited about the next few weeks. Something I feel like we talk about often is how Africa is much more than just one continent, even though we generalize it a lot in our conversation. So I'm really looking forward to digging into the different regions so that we can start to build this wealth of knowledge in the different ways that different regions operate in terms of entrepreneurship, finance, and industry. So just wanted to add that in, I guess. Thank you guys so much for joining us as always. And to Riva, welcome. Hope to have you again in the future. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you all next week.
This was awesome. Thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye, guys. Take care.
Okay.
Hey,
So
what's up?
I have done a horrible thing where I have done a deep dive into the internet's present freak out, cancel culture, like the whole relationship between Black Lives Matter protests and then people who are basically internet people having mental breakdowns and leaving platforms left and right. I don't know if you know who Jenna Marbles is, but she's one of like the first. She was one of the first YouTubers. I never watched her channel a lot, but I knew she existed. I had watched a couple of her things. She has 20 million subscribers. So if you've been on YouTube, you've probably seen her things pop up in your recommends at some point because she's often trending. And she basically just canceled herself a few weeks ago. And it had to do with, I mean, like she was just always covered in self-tanner, but she did like a Nicki Minaj impersonation, and that was like, I don't know, in 2011. And they're like, you did blackface, get off the internet. And she was just like, you know what, I'm tired, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And she had a breakdown and she left. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, while it might be better from a marketing standpoint and from a branding standpoint for us to go on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram, there are just so many landmines right now with my face and talking about anything that has to do with diversity. Because basically, team woke, team cancel culture will automatically be like, yay, a saint. And then the moment I will inevitably make a misstep, they'll be like, death to Emily, death to everything she's ever touched. And I'll be like, yeah, except like people are complicated and, you know, we're nuanced people and that was taken out of context or whatever. And so I'm thinking, one, podcasts are much lower risk. Podcasts seem to cause people to have mental breakdowns much less than having a strong presence on Instagram, on Twitter, or on YouTube. And I think it might be very possible to have a primarily podcast format that could be promoted on the other things. But, you know, do short little clips and then push them out on the other platforms and use those as a funnel to the podcasts.
I like it.
That one of the ways that it would be good for us, but it's also a way for me to avoid getting in like accusations of neocolonialism are going to be a really big risk for us, our branding, and my face. The fact that like I'm Asian and I'm American, these are all problems when it comes to talking about money in Africa. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about like what specific topics you wanted to talk about, because one of the things that I'm really good at doing is getting access to people. And so it would, I think, A, be good for us, and then B, would be very ass saving, is if the majority of my role